Could you tell us what it was like being a kid in New York in the 1930s?
So, would you like to show us around?
What's that? Yes, sure. Come, I'll show you. My name is Peter Cardello. I was born in 1917 on July 20th. I'm the fifth of 6 children. Most of my education comes from reading the newspapers, the current events. What goes on in the city, what goes on in the state, what goes on in the country, and what goes on internationally. So I'm well aware of many things that have happened. I have no history of them, but I do remember them because I lived through them.
I grew up in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn. I got involved politically quite young because Brighton Beach became a center for Russian Jews, socialists, communists, left-wingers. But then again, most of the people that left Russia in those days, that my father left, were socialists.
This is Mr. Lewis. Now, even by looking from the back, I went to elementary schools in Italy, but the classes, they were all too much religion, too much politics, fascism, Mussolini at that time. So I was not a good student. When finally I came back to America in 1939, I came home and I discovered that my home was beautiful. It had the tallest building in the world. It was the richest country in the world. I felt at home. And I started to take pictures of New York.
I grew up mostly in Manhattan. My parents, they were just middle-class, hard-working Jewish people interested in their kids getting a good education and bringing home enough money to pay the rent. My father lost almost everything. He lost $30,000 in the Depression. He was ready to commit suicide, and my mother encouraged him to start over again, and he did.
My mother being my mother, who felt that as long as her family was fed and that we lived well, the rest of it should be given away. And she sort of ran her own social welfare agency in Brighton Beach, which nobody knew about. She was very busy helping families survive. And she was a good role model. She would go into the grocers, 1936, for instance. She'd go into the grocers and she'd say, "Harry, let me see your books." And my mother would pay maybe 3 or 4 people's bills for that month, and they wouldn't know who did it.
In the late 1930s, the worldwide depression was finally coming to an end. In Europe and Asia, a more ominous era was already taking its place. But in the US, there was genuine hope. A group of businessmen came together in Queens, New York to plan the World's Fair as a symbol of prosperity to come.
Well, the World's Fair was wonderful. For someone like me, it was like, it was full of visuals and wonderful things are happening, and also the future. I was a big science fiction fan, so I used to read science fiction, and that was like, hey, all those wonderful things that are going to happen in the future.
I went in Westinghouse and they were demonstrating the first television. It was running, you know, it was a miracle. And then they said, anybody wants to volunteer to be in front of the camera? And I sang an Italian song about a cat. Maramo, perché sei morto? Pane e vin non ti mancava. L'insalata era nell'orto e una casa avevi tu. Maramo, Maramo.
It was extremely exciting to me because it gave me the first flavor of internationalism, that there is more to life than just New York City and a middle-class Jewish household. I was able to go there with my friends because we were old enough to travel on the subway alone, and I loved to go to the different national pavilions and see what was going on. I felt I was going into another world.
It was such a beautiful, exciting place. And they had buildings that were done of different countries, and one was Russian and the other was German and another Italian, of course. And one by one, as the war started in Europe, the German building closed down, the Italian building closed down. They were really very exciting and really wonderful buildings and beautiful, beautiful things. And it really put a cloud over it that second year, 1940.
In 1939, when the war broke out in Europe, when Hitler invaded Poland, I was demonstrating with the communists against going to war. But my mother was really interested in what was happening in Europe, what was happening in Germany, and she was very aware of what was going on. And so when I said that we shouldn't go into the war, she was particularly upset because of what she knew was happening to the Jews in Germany.
I don't know that I even knew about it or thought about it.
No.
Really. You knew things were going on, but, well, you know, when you're a little more than a teenager, your life is pretty much what you're interested in. And you don't necessarily pay that much attention.
I was 13, 14 years old. It was difficult for me to conceive of anything as grand and as catastrophic as World War II, but I remember a certain fear that something is happening beyond me that I can't quite understand.
A Japanese flash. Imperial headquarters announced a state of war with the United States. We'll repeat that again. A Japanese flash. Imperial headquarters announced a state of war with the United States.
We were complacent. We never dreamed and never thought that they would come here.
Everybody was stunned, you know, I mean, just in absolute shock. And we as kids, well, I was pretty young at that time, and you had the feeling that everything's going to go to pot. I mean, it was just going to, everything will, before long, there would be planes flying over us, dropping bombs, and it was a very, very terrible kind of a feeling.
We were provoked to start with. We had to go to war. We had to clean this up. We had to join the Allies. Otherwise, Hitler would have dominated the entire world.
I was at a friend's house on Brighton 2nd Street, and we were a whole bunch of fellows and girls. We were all hanging out and talking and playing cards and listening to the radio. And they stopped in the middle of the song, and they announced that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. And I remember that I cried because I knew, it still brings tears to my eyes, that the boys that I was being to spend it, that war was going to last a long time. It was not going to be a short war, and that they were probably all going to go into the army, and that they might all be killed.
I do not know that I was that politically aware of what the ramifications would be, you know, until they actually happened.
What was annoying to me is that I ran fast out of Italy because I wanted to miss the war, and they sent me right back there. So I didn't like it. I didn't like it.
You had to go. You either went to war or you went to jail. And it was not easy.
So I was drafted into the Navy, and it was one of the saddest days in my life. We went on a train, all of us, to Sampson. That was the boot training, I guess that was, or for 8 or 10 weeks. I felt isolated. That what am I doing here? Because I'm a human being. To me, a human being was not made to destroy other human beings.
Hallstein came to the realization that he was completely opposed to the war and killing. He received an honorable discharge and returned to New York. Though far from the fighting, even in New York, it was getting hard to forget the war, with rationing, blackouts, and air raid sirens serving as a constant reminder.
And I remember one morning it was very, very empty for some reason. I seemed to be the only one in the street, and the sirens started. And I turned absolutely stone and cold. I was freezing. It was a frightening time. We didn't know if they could ever bomb us at that time. We had no idea the capabilities.
I mean, after all, there we were in Brighton Beach on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean. And across the Atlantic Ocean was where the war was going on. I remember walking around the streets in Brighton Beach, and we'd have blackouts. Everybody had to pull down their shades and turn out their lights, and we'd yell, "Hey, you up there, turn your lights out." Very, very dramatic.
We weren't supposed to light anything. We had to keep our shades down. You weren't allowed to drive at night with lights. It was total control over, because they were afraid, because from far up you could see a pin. A light was an indication that there was something there.
It was really frightening. It was frightening because of the purpose of the blackouts. It just puts you in the middle of a wartime situation, almost similar, because you couldn't do anything. You were helpless. But people chipped in and they helped each other.
Were you in school? I don't remember doing this, where we'd have to go under our desks.
We'd have to go under our desks.
Tell about that, because I don't remember that at all.
Yeah.
Maybe
Well, every once in a while they'd start the sirens. They'd notify the schools, air raid drills. And as soon as we heard the sirens, we would get down underneath our desks and just stay there until the all clear. And as little children, that was frightening.
There was practice for in the event that there was a bomb dropped. That did happen, yeah. But I just never thought, I just didn't think it would happen, you know.
Why is that?
Everybody was pretty much going about their business. You know, that's the strange thing about war, that at least over here in those wars where, as you say, there's no bombing or something, that life goes on. Life goes on while the rest of it is going on over there.
Unlike soldiers in Europe, American soldiers had a home to come back to, far from the war. Many soldiers on furlough came back to New York and found a haven of constant entertainment.
There were a lot of soldiers, you know, coming and going. That would be about the only difference you could find, because you saw soldiers on the street.
This is a place to which military people were going, people going to different parts of the world where the war was going on. And this was one of the high points. This was like a hub for a lot of that.
They all had a good time in New York. Everybody came to New York. The soldiers and sailors that came to New York, they were showered with love and kisses.
Most of these fellows who frequented the United Service Organization ballrooms and things had come back from overseas, and they had been in combat. So this was an uplifting kind of an affair for them. And you could see it, and the girls were usually friendly with them, and you could see that they enjoyed this because they could completely block out what they had come from, you know. And this was a very uplifting and helpful thing for them psychologically.
It was a very important thing to keep the morale not only of the troops up, but of the people. And this was a place that people would come to.
And it made us feel proud to think that when people walked through the doors of the music hall, it was so awesome anyway, that building.
Yeah.
They could leave what was going on outside. They could forget for a few hours.
Yeah.
But it was sad too, very sad, because all these fellows that were leaving, many of them we knew personally, and you'd see them, and everybody's trying to have you know, esprit de corps or something. But you knew that many of them weren't going to come back.
Well, the war continued, and it was pretty devastating. There was a lot of stuff happening all over, and we were getting as much news as you can get. And of course, it's different than television. We got newsreels, and we used to go to newsreel theaters to get extended newsreels, because they'd only show a little bit in your local movie house between the two pictures that you were sitting to see. I remember the Battle of the Bulge, the Belgian front. That was just devastating, just devastating. But because you were sitting in a theater, it wasn't at home. It was, you saw it on a movie screen just like you saw movies. It was movies. It had some distance.
My mother-in-law had gone to the movies. She went to the music hall. And on the newsreel, she saw my husband's ship, and she said, "Holy Mary, Mother of God, there's my son on the ship." She swore she saw him waving. And knowing my husband, he might have.
He might. Knowing Kevin.
They were showing us all kinds of pictures of suffering. The March of the Corregidor, they showed us the Battle of Iwo Jima, the Battle of Midway. They did a tremendous job lifting up the spirits of the American people.
Just when it seemed like the war would never end, on May 8th of 1945, the Allies won victory in Europe. But the fighting dragged on in Asia. The war seemed to be almost over, but would it ever be completely finished? In 1945, the U.S. achieved just that by forcing her surrender from Japan.
VJ Day.
Oh, gosh.
When the war was over.
Yeah,
And
no
when
idea.
Truman was going to make the announcement while we were on stage.
So somebody
In the
wings gave a signal
The V.
of a V. And we're facing away from the audience, and we all start turning individually and around with these big fat grins like you've never seen in your life.
And it was a general delirium that this, thank God, this terrible catastrophe is over. And now we could begin to live our lives peacefully again.
VJ Day was a relief. It really was a relief. But I was also so appalled by the atom bomb that I felt that we really had opened a Pandora's box.
According to the structure of the Japanese mind, I think we did the right thing, because they were not about to surrender.
I didn't care much for the atomic bomb because it's just something that will destroy more people. Eventually could be our end, They are all, eventually every nation will have an atomic bomb.
Did you feel like that at the time?
I felt like that at the time, yes. Yes.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I happened to see an A-bomb go off. I was in Las Vegas, and I remember staying up all night to be able to see it, and the only reason we knew that it was going to happen, because nobody ever told you, people just said be sure that your windows are slightly ajar, but the place was covered with a lot of brass. Mm-hmm. And at 5:30 in the morning, there is this huge light. This is way in the distance, and all of a sudden comes this mushroom cloud, and I had my camera. I was so astounded that I never pressed the darn camera, and this pink, it's like 6 seconds later, the ground underneath me shook like crazy, like it was an earthquake. The huge doors, the glass doors that were that thick at the Thunderbird Hotel were going like this. And I remember all of us retiring to the bar, and I never drank. But this is one time I ordered a drink, and then I went to my room and I wrote a letter to my parents. And I said, God forbid it's ever dropped. I want to be right under it, not on the fringe.
At 16 or 17, we were a little more matured than the people of today. So maybe it was the hard times that made us mature.
I just felt I had no right. I had to kill another human being. I'd rather die myself. And I still feel that way at the age of 81. I feel the same way now. And again, that's where the war helped remind me who I am. World War II was not a good war. We call it a good war. It was not a good war. It was not a just war. It was just war.
A good war.
A good war.
As opposed to Iraq?
As opposed to any war.
Or Vietnam? Yes, definitely was a good war.
Right. You knew what you were fighting for. And you knew who you were fighting and why you were fighting. It was clean, very clear.
I think for myself, since I don't have that much time left, that I have really no hope. I live without hope. But because my own life, my own personal life is fine, and I can't seem to stay away from the news, it's very hard to feel that things are going to be any different. I look at you two, you three, and I say, what kind of a world did we leave you? Not very good.
In making this film, we learned about World War II from New Yorkers who were our age when the war broke out. They were called the greatest generation fighting the good war. But as we discovered, history is not so definitive. In a world that grows more complex by the day, it is hard to have hope. But as young people, that is our responsibility. As we make decisions that will impact the world, we must learn from the past and have hope for a better future.